So it's tough because I think people kind of call it like the extrovert advantage. Not afraid to reach out to people, not afraid to say, hey, can you push my name along? It's really difficult, especially for some of my more introverted clients or people that might have more social anxiety and they don't want to reach out to people that they don't know. And that's where I would say, like, getting comfortable on LinkedIn, letting that be sort of a nice buffer where it's like you can just kind of even curate a nice word prompt that feels really comfortable for you and then just copy and paste that and use that in your outreach to people. And it's like networking light. No one's saying you have to go to like an in-person networking event and like slap a sticker like hello my name is on your shirt, right? And go, it's like you can take this in baby steps, but it is super, super important that you're putting yourself out there, because as the recruiter, it's like if you're the candidate and I'm the hiring manager, the recruiter, you're always going to tell me that you're awesome. I need other people to tell me that you're awesome.
Welcome back to NITW Podcast. I'm Charles Kransberger. We're a team of coaches and consultants on a mission to deliver as much economic value as possible to neurodivergent professionals and their employers. Joining us today is Krystal Hicks. She is the founder and career strategist of JOBTALK. Krystal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Krystal, you and I met recently and want to start by just telling our audience, who are you and where do you fit in this whole employment ecosystem?
Yeah, I feel like I've lived in every corner of the employment ecosystem.
Same.
So jobs have been my job for about 18 years. So I started off in staffing and like working for a temp agency and kind of learned about the employment sector from the ground up. And then I went into more of a career services role. I really kind of wanted to work in higher ed with students that were kind of leaving and like figuring out what they could do with their majors and stuff like that. And so I loved the career services space. I was in that for 7 or 8 years. And then I moved into corporate and actually did internal corporate recruitment and internal talent acquisition. So when I say I've kind of lived in all corners and pockets, that's kind of like what I mean. And then in 2019, I left corporate and gave my boss a 12-month notice, and she was super supportive. And I was like, I really got to start this business. I got to see if there's something here, because it just seemed like there was such a market for it and that folks really kind of needed the help outside of just college career services and stuff. So in 2019, I launched JOBTALK, which is my career counseling practice. And about 80% of my time I spend with one-on-one job seekers that are in transition or just trying to figure out what their options are, figure out how to strategically navigate this wild job market that we are in. And about 20% of my time I spend with organizations that are trying to either build more equity into their hiring practices or improve their employer branding so people understand why they're a great place to build their career with. So yeah, been self-employed for about 7 years now, and I see about 400 clients a year, coast to coast, and everybody's different industries, different levels, different ages, different functions. So it's wild. It's a wild time. This market is very unsavory. Talking to a lot of folks. So I've been very busy.
Right. And I love that you've been able to distill all of those experiences and recognize patterns over time. Like you said, you started 18 years ago in the wake of the '08 financial crisis and the recession, right? And you've lived through a pandemic and now in the age of AI. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because like you said, from the perspective of a lot of the neurodivergent professionals in our talent pool and network, it's hard, and either have a job and are holding on to it for dear life, or having a hard time, getting and keeping that next job. So what are you seeing as some of those biggest barriers that job seekers are facing in a 2026 context, and how are you helping them navigate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the way that I try to explain to people is, yes, 2008. Geez, it seems like it was just yesterday and yet feels like a lifetime ago.
It's been one calamity after another, right?
Yeah. So 2008 was a really great example, though, to compare to what we're dealing with now, because in 2008, people were like, okay, financial recession, financial services impacted, mortgages, like it was kind of specific. There were definitely some like additional prongs of things that were going on, making it painful for folks, but it was pretty sector specific. Now we are dealing with sort of what I call the perfect storm, because I think we have seen a lot of things happen since this administration took over that has been like causing, kind of a mass exodus out of the federal space. So that created a lot more saturation in the nonprofit and private sector space. Then you had all of these tech layoffs that have been going on post COVID, companies that just way over indexed and now they're scaling back. And companies that I think continue to just try to figure out like what their sweet spot is. Are we having people work remotely or not? Right. So the layoffs that impact that industry then sends a whole bunch more people back into the job market. So more saturation. Then we have the remote, hybrid, on site debacle. Every company trying to figure out how they want to navigate this. And I think for a lot of job seekers also figuring out like, what do I actually need from a flexibility perspective to operate and to run my life and to manage kids or whatever. And so the specific pain points that come in with that is like with a remote position, it's a national talent pool. So you are seeing 1,000 applicants a day, and that's coming straight from like my friends that are still in fully remote recruitment roles for remote companies. And so even with hybrid stuff, back in the day, I call it the proximity issue because back in the day, if there was a position located in, Boston, right, and you're in the city, okay, well, the people that are applying to that 5 day a week on-site job are probably going to be within an hour of the location. Well,
Right.
now if they say you only have to come into the office 2 days a week, all of a sudden that proximity circle goes like this. So the eligibility sphere of like candidate pools is just exploding, which is a great thing because I'm such a huge fan of hybrid and remote work structures. But at the same time, it's created this perfect storm where we have saturation coming in from every corner. And there's other things too, but it's just like what it's creating is a lot more competition for folks. So the biggest barrier that I see people kind of running into now is just getting that first call. I mean, it's really, really hard to get that first call. So the resume's got to be dialed in, but also, are you following up? What's your LinkedIn look like? I mean, it's a lot. The days of clicking an apply button and waiting for a call because you're a good fit for something, those days are long gone. Like, it's just really tough. So people are having to use more of their bandwidth and energy, not around like perfecting this resume, but really around how do I stand out from everybody else that I'm applying against that also has a good resume. So that's more of the issue that we see now.
No, I love that breakdown. And to your points about the trade-offs from the company's perspective, some of those more flexible work arrangements open up your talent pool and give you access to more and better talents, more aligned with your workforce needs. And from the perspective of a lot of neurodivergent professionals in our talent pool, they've enjoyed that flexibility as well and have been able to take a lot of their potential support needs from a 5 day a week in office environment into their own hands and be more productive and more insulated against burnout and all the things. And then the flip side of that conversation is there's more competition, right? And you have to be really dialed in. And something that we had talked about in our previous conversation was some of those, what we typically call the hidden curriculum of the workplace. Like, what are those unwritten rules and expectation that nobody tells you about, but you're supposed to figure out through observation and deduction, right? But I think there's a hidden curriculum of the job search that it sounds like you're really helping your 400 clients a year play that game, right? And one example that we had talked about was having a resume that's congruent with applicant tracking systems, right? Because I think a lot of candidates might be a great fit for that role, but they're getting screened out because they found a resume template that looks pretty but wasn't compatible, right? Or maybe paid an expensive consultant to write the resume and
Yeah.
it wasn't compatible, right? So in addition to kind of that as a consideration, how else would you characterize kind of that hidden curriculum of the job search and those landmines, so to speak, that you help your clients not step on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I love how you set that up. And yes, to everything that you just said, I think, resumes are just a tough thing in general because I think when we're in this really murky kind of space as a job seeker, if you're unemployed and you're stressed out, there's a lot of emotional tax that's also going on during that. It's really, really hard to not get hyper focused on the one thing that we can control, which is that resume. And so a lot of times people are like, I just need help with my resume. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know, I'll figure it out, but I just need this resume. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, this resume can't be like just the willy-nilly thrown together. Like, this should be
Right.
subjective to what we're throwing it towards. So part of understanding how to stand out from all the volume is not to just have some generic resume that's being thrown, not just have some random cover letter that was AI generated. I think a lot of
Mm,
people are really missing the fact that a lot of employers are using stuff like Quillbot and GPT-0 to actually, like in a millisecond, they can just literally throw it in for free and see, okay, 85% of this resume was AI generated, or 100%
Right.
of this cover letter was AI generated. And so I think there's some of those unspoken things where some companies are starting to be more transparent about it. And they say, while we do love the fact that you might bring a strong skill set with AI to the job, for this application, we do want to get to know you and we want you to tell us about you. So, like, please don't use AI to generate your application materials.
That's
There's
a really interesting
some,
tension of like
yeah,
wanting to signal like I'm AI native and have these cutting edge skill sets without going too far with it and
yeah.
having it seen to be a crutch, right?
Yeah.
So that's
And
yeah, that's a really interesting
to
call
your
out. Yeah.
point, there's people thinking, "Oh, that's my secret weapon. I'm going to use these tools to make these great things." But as far as like the unspoken part, I would say please heavily edit and massage like what you're actually submitting, because it's so easy for us to see like what's been AI generated. Like, we just recruiters, like, we know like we got it. Like, I could look at it at a resume and tell you exactly what was ChatGPT generated because they word things certain ways. So there's things like that that I would say, even though it feels like a silver bullet, and this is where it's tough with LinkedIn and like the armchair experts that are out there, because I think there's a lot of misinformation or like fear mongering about like ATSs, the applicant tracking system, and people that are just totally taken advantage of, I think, where it's like, spend all this money and get this resume template so you can beat the ATS. And I'm like, oh my God. Anyone telling you that you need to beat an ATS has never been a recruiter. Like, I've implemented ATSs. Like there's nothing about beating it. It's like really just making sure, is your resume speaking to the job posting? You don't need to put all the keywords in white font at like 2 font size at the bottom. I've seen all of this stuff. The real unspoken parts of this are just get creative, think outside the box, and try to find someone to have a conversation with. And everybody's always heard the it's all about who you know kind of thing. But I always kind of remind folks it's also about who knows you and how they feel about what they know about you. So, really leaning on your network for the people that always kind of championed you in your roles, or people that are like, they know you in the community. Those kind of like lukewarm, not hot connections, but like lukewarm relationships that we have, those based on the data are all like kind of being more fruitful. And like those are the people that are willing to like throw your name across to somebody that they know at a company. So it's tough because I think people kind of call it like the extrovert advantage. Not afraid to reach out to people, not afraid to say, hey, can you push my name along? It's really difficult, especially for some of my more introverted clients or people that might have more social anxiety and they don't want to reach out to people that they don't know. And that's where I would say, like, getting comfortable on LinkedIn, letting that be sort of a nice buffer where it's like you can just kind of even curate a nice word prompt that feels really comfortable for you, and then just copy and paste that and use that in your outreach to people. And it's like networking light. No one's saying you have to go to like an in-person networking event and like slap a sticker like hello my name is on your shirt, right? And go, it's like you can take this in baby steps, but it is super, super important that you're putting yourself out there, because as a recruiter, it's like if you're the candidate and I'm the hiring manager, the recruiter, you're always going to tell me that you're awesome. I need other people to tell me that you're awesome. That's what we're doing here. So getting some LinkedIn recommendations, getting people to just kind of advocate for you in rooms that you're not in. And also, to the point of the resume, what else other than the resume can you submit for me that I can actually maybe leverage to get to know you a little bit more? Maybe it's a video cover letter. Maybe it's an intro video that you link at the top of your resume, right? It's just people have to think outside the box here. And sometimes I say this stuff to people and they're like, oh my God, that's so cringe. And I'm like, okay, but is this a barrier around capability or is this a barrier around willingness?
Right.
Because I think that
No,
you're capable of doing this. You might not want to, but do you not want to be unemployed more?
right.
So I have to gently kind of push people into that space where it's like, okay, let's think outside the box.
No, I love that point about the armchair experts, because a lot of times we hear feedback from neurodivergent professionals as far as this business guru advice just isn't resonating with them, right? Like you talk about the whole spiel about your network is your net worth and go out there and network. Like that initiating conversations can be really a challenge and a barrier for a lot of neurodivergent professionals, where once the conversation is on track, like they can take it from there, but getting that conversation started and and kind of establishing the tone can be a challenge and a barrier. And I love some of those points about how you prepare for those interactions so that you have a system in place that you can follow and is replicable. And part of that would be building out that portfolio, like you had mentioned, where
Mhm.
maybe like you said, you have that video cover letter, you have some work samples that you can have a conversation within the context of, and that level of preparation often helps a lot of the professionals in our network initiate and have more fruitful conversations where they're showcasing their skills and people leave on the same page about where the win-win potential is. So I
Yeah.
really love that. And I think that's a very fair breakdown of some of those success factors leading up to getting a job. But you kind of talked about zooming out these macro level economic disruptions that are going on. And something that we're very concerned about is making sure that not only are we helping neurodivergent professionals and companies with that hiring piece and addressing that barrier, but we want folks to be stable and have a career that's going to be a good fit for them long term, right? So as you're working with those 400 plus clients a year, what industries are you most confident with that stability, even thinking about like a 3 to 5 year horizon as you look into your crystal ball? Yeah.
My crystal ball with a K, I always say. Yeah, so industries, listen, it's funny because I teach a college to career class at the University of New Hampshire, which is my alma mater. It's where I used to run career services, and I always tell my students, guys, you got to remember there are whole spaces that are just coming to the surface now that didn't exist prior to today. And those are also going to be options for you. Like social media wasn't a thing. Like I graduated in '07. Like it was like Facebook like was barely a thing. What would you have like
Right.
MySpace? And yet now it's an entire space, it's an entire job function. So I always encourage people to not just look at like what I call the trusted steeds, right? The healthcare, the higher education. In most states, hospitals and universities are the biggest employers. So there's always going to be jobs there, even though higher ed is very much going through it right now, as is healthcare. But
Mhm.
there are going to always be like the manufacturing hubs, right? There's always going to be food manufacturing and beverage manufacturing. And I come from when I was in corporate, I worked for Lindt Chocolate, right? The truffle company. And so seeing the consumer packaged goods space up close was really eye-opening for me. There are so many well-paying opportunities in that space. And I just don't think that we ever really talk about that consumer world as much from a job hunting perspective. And I think it's a great place for a lot of people to look because there's all the same functions. Whether you're in the sciences, there's R&D, right? Whether you're accounting and finance, you have all of those business functions behind the scenes. So the consumer packaged goods world is huge. I would also say though, try to think about, like I tell my students, think about the space you want to be in and then start to research like what's the disruptive innovation that's actually coming down the pike right now? What is starting to jostle that industry, right? Like what are the things that are kind of coming up on the heels of that big company, big industry, whatever it is that someone's looking for? And start to ask yourself, okay, who are the players in that space? So right now, everyone's talking about AI. Okay, we're talking about how AI is like, disrupting the workplace, taking away jobs, whatever. But AI is also creating jobs. Like you have AI research hubs now. You have entire consulting firms that are, you know, hanging their hat on like their AI expertise and they're going to come in and help companies really drive ROI through what they're implementing with AI, right? So there's still like new kind of bubbles of options that are popping up for people, but we have to kind of think of it in that sense of it's not just about what's open today. It's really about what is possibly opening tomorrow and or what will still be sustainable tomorrow. And I think one of the things that people also need to do is really kind of hold up that heavy mirror, I call it, and take a hard look at their own level of resilience and kind of say, like, do I want to work in a highly innovative environment? Because if I do, it means that we're going to face this disruption head on. And like, it means that I might have less job security, to be honest, right? It means that if you go work at a startup, they might get sold, they might not get funding, there's a lot of ifs, of like where your career could take you. So I try to encourage people to think just a little bit further outside of their job function and say, like, what's the space that you actually want to attach yourself to? And so when it comes to job security, healthcare, medical device, pharmaceutical, higher education, manufacturing. These are spaces that are absolutely going to be there tomorrow. But I think it's about also looking at your skill set and saying, okay, how do I also continue to upskill so that I stay relevant? So that if this company is purchased by somebody else, I'm retained in that acquisition, right? So it's like, don't get stagnant with your skill set.
I love that. And to your point about all of those different industries, I think there's such ripe opportunity in those industries for neurodivergent professionals. And there was kind of a
Big time.
misconception. Yeah, I think just as a product of a lot of the initial players in this neurodiversity at work movement were in the tech and finance space. So there became this conflation between neurodivergent professional skill sets and it being tech and finance specific, when we're talking globally about a population of over a billion people with very diverse skills and interests and capabilities. And I think shining a light on some of those other aspects of the or other industries in our economy where that opportunity lies is going to be super helpful. And kind of to your point as well about the consultants who are helping drive AI adoption and diffusion across those companies, right? That's something that we've been getting a lot of outreach about from our partners in recent months about, what are some of the most common use cases of AI to address some of the pain points of neurodivergent professionals to help them be more productive and mitigate miscommunication and help them have the tools to do their job, right? And I know you work with companies as well to take a look at their hiring processes and systems and how to optimize those. Tell us our audience a little bit more about your work in that space and some of those blind spots that you're bringing into view for employers.
Yeah, sure. I mean, specifically related to, folks that manage either a disability or they're managing some type of neurodiversity or, when the DEI conversation was so, big like 5 years ago, and we're talking about primarily race and gender, I think, neurodivergent folks had always sort of been there already. Cause like, what is the stat? 20% of our population manages some form of neurodiversity. So I would always tell my corporate clients, like, this is something we have to build into your culture statement or your employer branding or even just like your recruitment strategy, because you probably already have 1 in 5 of your employees that are, dealing with either sensory challenges or they're dyslexic or they have OCD or ADHD or are on the autism spectrum. And so I think there's the conversation that was never really being had out loud always kind of existed. And it was really what I loved seeing so much was actually when the DEI conversation became so big and consultants like myself were being pulled into organizations to help recruit, diverse folks and help to increase, diversity in the workforce and stuff. I was always kind of pushing back on those companies saying, well, let me talk to some of your diverse employees now. Like, I'm not out here trying to like hire people so that they can shoulder the burden of helping you diversify your workforce. Like, you need to be doing this work up front and creating a really hospitable environment that's very accommodating if you want to diversify your workforce. And it was so funny because sometimes they'd be like, well, we're like, I live up here in New Hampshire, right? They're like, well, we're a predominantly white state, we really don't have any, employees of color. And I'm like, if that's all you're thinking about when we talk about diversity, like, I was like, do you have anybody that's self-disclosed, that has ADHD or that's on the spectrum? Like, it was like having to actually have these conversations with employers for the first time. And then what I found out was like, a couple weeks later, the CEO I was talking to, or like the, whoever, they would go and talk to HR and they would actually start talking about like, are we doing a good enough job like providing, accommodation for folks that aren't maybe necessarily looking for formal accommodations, but that just people that are like, one CEO told me the second I started poking around, all of a sudden I found all these complaints from people about our fluorescent lighting. And that was like a huge thing. And from a sensory perspective, it was like really problematic. And then I heard from another person, they were like, yeah, we totally got sucked into the whole open floor concept thing. That was like a big thing like 10 years ago. Everyone was like, get rid of these cubicles. And they're like, and now no one can focus and no one gets anything done. And so I think what's really interesting and the way that I think is the best to really champion these messages internally, especially for folks that are neurodivergent, is A lot of the things that support folks with neurodiversity totally also support folks who do not manage any kind of neurodiversity. So,
Exactly.
having actually like quiet space where you can focus, like a lot of the things that I think neurodivergent folks for a long time just thought, man, if I can just get a job where I'm 100% remote, I can at least control my environment a bit more and protect my productivity. And what's so funny is like when you actually start having these conversations on a broader scale in house, like in the organizations, there's so much support for a lot of these initiatives. You know what I mean? So, a lot of what I do with organizations kind of falls into that realm of like retention, and when we have markets like 2016, 2017, 2018, where it was like crazy good hiring and you couldn't find the right person, right? It was like you're doing all this hiring, but you got all these job openings and plenty of jobs for people to apply to, and now it's just like the opposite. Not enough jobs, way too many applicants. So now we're really talking about people looking at their employer brand more strategically and saying, okay, yes, we make this great product, or yes, we offer this great service, but what does it mean to really work here and build your career here? And like, how do we become an employer of choice? And, what is the kind of intention that needs to be behind that work? And so when I come in, we're looking at things like your employee value proposition. We're looking at things like, what is the messaging that you put out there? And do you actually live up to it? Like, if you're sitting here telling me you're super inclusive and then I'm not getting that vibe when I actually talk to your people, this is like false advertising. And like, there's a question here of, do you want to just look good or do you want to be good? And so, kind of being the one that comes in, and sometimes I feel like I'm accountability, like I'm the accountability partner, like, take your medicine kind of thing. Like, you're paying me to come in and help you do this work, but you need to do it. And I think sometimes, when I meet with leaders that are not ready to actually do everything they say they want to do, that's a tough conversation. But I found that a lot of times by the time I'm being brought in, people are like, they want to see the change. They've either lost a lot of really great employees. They didn't know how to better support them. They just assumed it was all about money. Well, we can't pay them more. And I'm like, really? Because when I talk to your people, they actually just want more flexibility. Like, money
Right.
didn't come up once, you know? And whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, I think there's so many different ways that people can actually look at those employee value proposition, those EVP, pillars around like, what does it really mean to be in this organization? Like some of these older CEOs, like the boomer generation back in the day when like you would go work at one company for 30, 40 years and then like collect your gold watch and sign off, sail off into the sunset for retirement. Like, we don't have that reality anymore. We have 12 changes on average now. So if you want to retain people longer than the 4 or 5 year average that we have, you have to do things differently. And so it's an interesting time. I think our work-life relationship is really being challenged. And I think it's really important for companies to do that good work internally. So I'm always happy to do it when I get the call to do it. But I always kind of say too, I say no more than I say yes. Sometimes companies want me to come in and just like help them kind of throw lipstick on a pig kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm not here
Right.
for it.
Right.
like, like you got a lot more work to do before you're ready for me to come in and actually help you bring people into the organization. So
No, I really love it. There's so many important takeaways there, and that tracks with our experience as well in terms of the stated priorities we're hearing from our partners historically and still today have related to recruitment, retention, and that employer branding piece, right? And I think a missing element that a lot more mid-career neurodivergent professionals are reaching out to us about is that more advancement piece. And you put it beautifully in terms of what conditions need to be in place for a neurodivergent professional to think long term, with your organization, and what is the win-win potential for both parties there. And I think so many mid-career neurodivergent professionals are seeking advancement not through getting promoted at their current company, but by leaving their company, or through entrepreneurship and starting their own business, and what that looks like when they have capabilities that aren't being honored, or there's not a pathway forward with their current organization, right? So I'm curious, for those maybe more mid-career clients that you're working with who are experiencing that advancement barrier, how are you helping them, advance their careers and get unstuck and onto that next step?
I love that question. And I think it's such an important part of the conversation that we don't always noodle into it in the right way. I find that a lot of people are like, how do you grow your career? It's almost like saying to a business owner, like, how do you scale your business? Right. And it's like, well, scaling is going to look different to everybody. growth is one of those things that as a recruiter, when I was in corporate, growth was part of our EVP language. So like I was talking to every single candidate coming into our organization through like every phone screen I was doing, help me understand like we're in a fast growth, upward momentum trajectory with our business. So, we're looking for somebody who can grow with the organization. What does that look like to you? So I was always like encouraging the conversation around growth. And I think it's so important that companies do this. And when they don't, candidates need to self-advocate in this way, because if I ask three different clients, okay, you all tell me that you want to grow your career. What does that growth actually look like for you? And one person might say, I need to grow my income. I want to continually make more money. Okay, I hear you. A second person might say, it's less about the money for me. It's more about like, I want the titles. I want the promotions. I don't know why. Maybe I hate it, but it just means something to me. Like I want to get promoted. I want to see it on the resume. I want to see it on LinkedIn. Like I want to gain upward momentum. And then a third person might say, yeah, I don't care about either of those two things. I need to be challenged because I get bored quickly. So I want scope, scale, influence, power, authority. I want to grow in that direction. I want to grow my reputation and my credibility with the business. I want the ear of leadership. So everybody's growth looks different. So when companies say, oh yeah, like, we want to grow people, and people are like, oh my God, great. I want to be grown. It's like, that is not where the conversation ends. That's where the conversation starts. Like, help me understand is like your golden phrase, right? Okay, I love hearing that you guys love to grow your employees. Help me understand what that looks like. Is that typically through upward mobility and promotion? Is that like something that's typically like an 18 to 24-month timeline? Or is that typically just through bonuses? Or is that through special projects? Like, help me understand when you talk about growth in your organization, what does that look like? Now, companies that are really good at this typically are going to have career pathing programs. So, we actually had language around this because we had a process map around it. If you come to me and you're a financial analyst and you say, hey, I've been here for 3 or 4 years, I love this company, but like, what else can I do from here? We would sit down with you and actually go through all these different options. And we were very internal friendly. Like, okay, you're really into special projects. Let's talk about doing some global mobility work. Maybe you can go abroad for 6 months and do a special project and come back. Like, we did this stuff. So I play a very small violin here for companies that are like big and like well resourced and they don't invest in this stuff
Mm.
because they really should be. I think some companies think they can afford turnover, and I think they're surprised at how much it actually costs them, especially when they get to a place where all of a sudden their reputation is being trashed on Glassdoor or Indeed employer profiles. There's a lot more transparency now. So I think companies need to be clear, because the thing that I see unfortunately all the time is that if I'm looking at a client's resume and we're kind of like, hey, bring me up through your resume, right? And they're like, okay, well, I worked at this one startup, and then like, after a couple years, I was just growing stale. They couldn't grow me. I'm like, okay. And then the next one, it's like, oh, I went to the next place, but then it was like, there was no place for me to go. Okay. And so
Yikes.
then I'm just like, I'm seeing a lot of the same patterns here. Like, help me understand what this conversation is like. Like, if you want that promotional growth, why are you going to startups? They don't have the infrastructure to even support the kind of growth that you're telling me is actually the kind of growth that fills the cup. So every time you're ready for promotion and they just throw you a bonus, you feel dismissed. But this is their version of growing you. And this all could have been avoided if we had had the conversation. So I really think it's partly on the company. They need to have some language around this, if not programming, like career pathing programming. And the candidate needs to self-advocate and understand, like, what is the kind of growth that actually intrinsically motivates you.
Yeah, I love that framing as it's a 50-50 proposition, and some of that transparency about what the pathway looks like and what the skills economy that, both the candidate and the company are looking at looks like. Yeah, I think that's really brilliant advice. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience today. Lots of great takeaways for them. And if folks want to stay connected with you and follow Job Talk, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. JobTalkLLC.com is the website, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn, so I'm there all the time. But yeah, and just to put it out there too, like, I don't even necessarily specialize in working with folks that are managing some kind of neurodiversity, or whether they disclose it at work or not. But I also, I mean, this is kind of where like you and I. Like, I just love that you are so great at working with this population specifically because the challenges are real. These are real people managing careers, and sometimes they just kind of feel like they're out on an island in their company and they don't have someone that can really advocate for them in a clear way. And I always kind of tell folks, like, listen, job hunting, strategy, resume, cover letters, figuring out what you want to do next, I got you. But when it really comes to understanding how to disclose, how to advocate internally, what to say, what not to say, what are the things you can even ask for when it comes to accommodation, like, I am always going to point them in your direction, Charles. So I appreciate it.
Amazing. No, appreciate that support, Krystal. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.